Hong Kong, one of the wealthiest cities in the world. This center of global commerce found itself under siege from the air. The city had long outgrown its tiny airport. The onslaught of huge commercial jetliners was endangering the lives of residents. Inefficiency threatened to choke off the lifeblood of the city: trade. Hong Kong desperately needed a new world-class airport. But there was no land to spare. Solving this problem called for one of the most complicated civic engineering projects in history. Builders estimated the project would take decades, but they were given only 7 years. Could engineers and builders execute a project this extreme? John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. Cathay Pacific Flight 889 prepares for takeoff. It's bound for Hong Kong, but it's about to fly into a great unknown. The pilots have made this trip hundreds of times before, but never like this. Because even as the plane lifts off from New York, in Hong Kong, the airport suddenly goes dark. It's not a power failure. This is a historic event. The culmination of nearly a decade of frenzied planning and construction. Hong Kong has just shut down one of the world's major international airports. And, with planes en route, is moving the entire operation, staff and equipment to a new location in only 7 hours. It's the final hurdle in a 7-year race to complete one of the largest, most ambitious civil engineering projects of the 20th century. It all began in the 1980s, when Hong Kong faced a critical turning point. In the 20th century, Hong Kong had become one of the world's great economies. But these towering skyscrapers masked a glaring weakness. Kai Tak Airport. Dangerous and outdated, the airport sat crammed in the heart of the city. Kai Tak made every flight into Hong Kong a heart-stopping flirtation with disaster, forcing massive jumbo jets to steer past mountains and skim the tops of apartment buildings. More than 6 accidents or near misses occurred at Kai Tak in the last 2 decades. In this accident in 1993, the plane overshot the runway, injuring 22 and killing 2. And there was another enormous problem: cargo. The airport had only 1 runway. It had become a major bottleneck to global trade.
Hong Kong could not continue with its existing airport in terms of passengers, and even more important in terms of cargo. Hong Kong is the biggest international airport in terms of cargo in the world.
With billions of dollars at stake, pressure was mounting for Hong Kong to build its way out of the gridlock. But where? The city was jam-packed, without a shred of available land. There was only one possibility: build the airport at sea. The proposal was mind-boggling. It called for the creation of a new island in the South China Sea. On that island, a massive new air facility, capable of handling the world's biggest jets, and the single largest passenger terminal on Earth. But this massive airport was itself only a small fraction of the overall project. To get passengers and freight to and from the airport quickly, the plan also called for 35 kilometers of new superhighways and tunnels, and a new high-speed rail system. As well as the world's longest double-decker suspension bridge. City planners knew that without a new airport, Hong Kong's safety and economy were at serious risk. The city of Hong Kong had proposed the world's most ambitious engineering project. A system of bridges, tunnels and railways, and the largest passenger terminal ever built. Estimates projected that under normal conditions, the project could take between 10 and 20 years. But these were not normal conditions. The project would have to be completed in just 7. A demanding schedule wasn't the only issue. Politics, left over from the 19th century, added a unique twist to this 21st century endeavour. Hong Kong had been a British colony since the Opium Wars. But as part of the peace treaty signed in 1898, Britain agreed to return the territory to China after 99 years. Now, that due date was a mere 7 years away. No one knew how the change in government would affect Hong Kong's economy, or the new airport. There was only one way to make certain politics wouldn't stall construction. Finish the airport before the handover.
The airport was the pawn in this huge game of chess, the political chess that was going on. But Hong Kong's a very unique place in as much that there's very much a can-do, will-do approach to life, and the Chinese work ethic is admirable, and I think it would have been difficult to achieve the progress that we did make in many other places in the world.
In September 1991, the race was on. The first challenge, create enough level ground for the airport. Engineers had their eyes on a pair of rocky little islands called Chek Lap Kok and Lam Chau, 26 kilometers from Hong Kong Island. But neither of the islands was large enough or flat enough to house the airport. One thing was certain. First, the mountains had to go. Then it was time for the army of workers to begin. Commanding giant earth movers, they carted away 200 million tons of rubble. But all that material would not go to waste. It would soon be recycled as fill to turn the two small islands into a single larger one. But before that could happen, the sea floor needed to be cleared. For this task, a fleet of the world's largest underwater dredgers arrived on the scene. Like giant vacuum cleaners, their underwater hoses scoured the ocean bottom, removing a layer of soft mud 12 meters thick to expose the stable rock below. The cleared seabed provided a solid base for what was to come next. A layer of sand, followed by the pulverized remains of the island's mountains. With every truckload, the 2.4-kilometer gap between the two islands grew steadily smaller.
Everybody was under extraordinary time pressure. It was one of the world's biggest land-moving exercises in the history of the world.
Working day and night, inch by inch. Workers on land and sea slowly turned two islands into one. By the time they finished, the workers had moved more than 500 million tons of earth. Enough to fill the Roman Colosseum 200 times over. As the airport island was taking shape, construction crews began the daunting task of connecting the island to the city. Plans called for new tunnels, bridges, and highways to be built across 35 kilometers of land and water. Almost immediately, engineers ran into a problem: finding a way out of Hong Kong across Victoria Harbour. Two automobile tunnels had already been built in the harbour decades earlier, but they were now overloaded with traffic, sometimes causing 2-hour traffic jams at rush hour. A third, much larger tunnel was needed. It had to be wide enough to carry 6 new lanes of traffic. Engineers devised a plan to assemble the tunnel underwater from mammoth concrete and steel sections. The sections were manufactured at a harbourside quarry 15 kilometers from the final tunnel location. Each one weighed 32,000 tons when finished, as heavy as a fully loaded ocean liner. When a section was completed, builders capped both ends with watertight seals and then flooded the quarry. The massive tunnel sections were then floated out into the harbour. Once at the final location, the seals were broken, flooding the section and causing it to sink. Divers carefully guided the sections into place. Powerful hydraulic jacks pulled the sections together and created a watertight seal. Then, builders made the final connections from the inside, and the tunnel was complete. It lay more than 15 meters underwater and stretched for 2 kilometers, connecting the busy island of Hong Kong to the mainland. With one waterway conquered, an even greater challenge loomed. Along the proposed route from Hong Kong to the airport, there was one major water crossing to overcome: the nearly 5-kilometre span from the mainland to North Lantau Island. Initially, planners hoped to build another underwater tunnel here to carry airport traffic. But the channel turned out to be too deep, and heavy shipping traffic at the surface would have made underwater construction far too dangerous. So engineers had to come up with another solution. They proposed not one, but two massive bridges, long enough to span the waterways, and high enough to allow even the most gargantuan ships to pass underneath. The longer span, more than 2.5 kilometers long, would be one of the longest suspension bridges in the world. But it was a risky proposal. The bridge would need to withstand one of the most destructive forces on Earth: typhoons. Packing devastating winds, well over 300 kilometers per hour. As many as 8 typhoons slam into Hong Kong each summer. Any bridge built here would have to first prove its strength in the laboratory. To understand how winds would affect the structure, engineers first created computer models. This model simulates the motion of the suspension bridge in a 65 km/h wind, amplified 1,000 times, allowing engineers to identify potential design flaws. Using the data collected, engineers next built a detailed scale model. They placed it in a high-speed wind tunnel and subjected it to a simulated Category 10 typhoon. The results were disturbing. The bridge would become dangerously unstable in high winds. Designers couldn't make the bridge any shorter, so they made it heavier. Below the main roadbed, they added a lower deck for trains and 2 more lanes of traffic. This design stiffened the bridge. It solved a potential problem and added capacity. But for the builders, the design raised the stakes. Now they had to build the largest double-decker suspension bridge in history, with no extra time to do it. First, the building site was leveled. Then, 2 mighty bridge towers were erected. They went up like skyscrapers, each more than 60 stories tall. The plan was to hang heavy suspension cables from these towers to support the massive road deck. But the giant cables needed to be 1 meter in diameter and each weighed 13,000 tons. Because of their massive weight, the cables could not simply be assembled on the ground and then hoisted into place. Instead, bridge builders used an ingenious but risky technique. They built the massive cables in the air. 2 spinning wheels shuttled several small strands at a time, back and forth across the towers, each pass adding girth to the massive cables. It's not a job for just anyone. It requires a head for heights and a stomach of steel. And that means specialists, like these sure-footed, fearless Gurkha engineers. Like Sherpas, they come from the slopes near Mount Everest in Nepal and have a long history of mountaineering. By hand and by hook, the Gurkhas guided the spinning wheels and huge steel ropes from tower to tower. Engineers knew that during cable spinning, the bridge would be particularly vulnerable to extreme weather. If a typhoon were to suddenly strike, it could snarl the cables, hurling thousands of steel strands through the air like whips. So, racing against the weather, Gurkhas threaded 86,000 kilometers of steel cable through the air in just under 9 months. That's enough cable to circle the globe more than twice. Once the cables were secured in place, the final and most dangerous part of the project could be completed: installing the huge bridge decks. Each prefabricated section weighs 900 tons, and to be installed had to be hoisted from a barge on the water 60 meters straight up. Starting at the center and working out towards the towers, builders painstakingly raised each deck section into place. Finally, 5 years after the project began, the bridge was complete.
The pressure probably squeezed the project along. It greased the wheels and things had to work. And if it had not been for that pressure, it might have been that we might have hit something that would have held it up for a while. It was quite staggering to me and to others, I think, that we had constructed this monument, the sort of bridge to the future.
The completion of the bridge and the tunnel provided the two crucial water links on the route from the city to its new airport. But now, those two links needed to be connected to each other. It would mean building two brand new highways right in the middle of one of the most congested places on Earth. The city of Hong Kong had already built the largest bi-level bridge in the world and a 2-kilometer tunnel under Victoria Harbour, both in record time. Now it was time to construct the arteries that would link them together. The first, the Kwai Chung Expressway. This would take traffic from the tunnel 15 kilometers down the coast all the way to the new bridge. To keep congested Kowloon Port open and traffic moving, builders were forced to construct the new highway over an existing 15 lanes of traffic. And that wasn't all. To minimize traffic slowdowns, the construction crews could work only at night. Road crews raced to bolt together Hong Kong's first ever highway in the sky. Meanwhile, the other highway, the final link in the chain, was also under construction. This 12-kilometer road, called the North Lantau Expressway, would take traffic from the bridge to the airport. But this last leg also presented a major engineering challenge. The terrain where the highway was to go was made up of rocky, steep hills. So engineers came up with a novel solution. They decided to extend the coastline a kilometre out into the bay.
North Atlantic Expressway really is a land formation job. It comprises a lot of dredging of soft material from the seabed, building 9 kilometres of seawall and then 25 million cubic metres of land formation behind the seawalls. Then on top of that, there was ultimately the road system, the airport railway to the airport, and all of the supporting utilities to the airport that included water, gas, telephone, everything.
Builders dumped more than 23 million tonnes of rock into the ocean. Enough stone to build a 1.5 metre wall from Moscow to Madrid.
As a consequence of the high level of activity, we actually crammed into 4 to 5 years, 10 to 15 years of work effort.
When this final link was finished, the route would be complete. A brand new thoroughfare, winding its way from the airport, sitting on a man-made island, along 12 kilometres of coastal highway, across one of the world's longest suspension bridges, over 10 kilometres of elevated highway, through an underwater tunnel into Hong Kong. It would be a stunning accomplishment. And yet, it wouldn't be enough. The new route would be great for cars and trucks, but it would do nothing for the 2.4 million people who use the subway. So engineers decided to add an ultra-high-speed rail line. It was an historic first.
Anywhere else in the world you will find that the railway has been fitted in afterwards. So we had an opportunity to design a railway in conjunction with the design of the airport itself.
The new Airport Express would need a huge new station in Hong Kong. But as it had been with the airport and highway, there was no land to spare. So, just as before, engineers created 20 hectares of new land in Victoria Harbour. In only 2 years, the new station was completed. A foyer to the distant airport. Here, passengers could check their bags onto their flights and settle in for a 20-minute ride beneath the harbour, across the bridges, along the coast, and step off the train inside the world's largest passenger terminal. There was just one problem. There was still no passenger terminal. Only 2 years before the project was due to be completed, construction finally began on the terminal complex. The plan called for the largest enclosed space in the world. But as builders began work on the terminal's massive foundation, they made a chilling discovery. Ocean tides were forcing groundwater up into the foundation. If not corrected, that groundwater would push the terminal off its foundation, all 500,000 square meters of it. Engineers knew they couldn't fight the force of the tides. They needed to find a way to secure the building against that steady pressure. Using massive hammer drivers, they pounded huge concrete piles into the earth, each weighing over 20 tons. The piles went through the landfill down to the ocean floor, effectively nailing the terminal to the bedrock. With the foundation secured, work on the terminal itself could begin. It was to be the crown jewel of the entire project. A passenger terminal of epic proportion. Its bird-like design was symbolic of flight. But just as construction was about to begin, project managers came to another disturbing realization. There was simply no way they could build the terminal fast enough to make the looming deadline. Project managers and the Chinese government began working on a solution that would allow construction to continue unimpeded during the transition to Chinese rule. While negotiations continued, engineers pressed ahead with the daunting task of raising the terminal roof. Luckily, it turned out to be relatively fast to build. It was made up of a repeating lattice of steel trusses that could be mass-produced on a gargantuan scale. Builders set up an enormous assembly line to build 136 identical roof segments, each weighing 125 metric tons, and crafted out of more than 100,000 individual pieces. But the roof segments were so large, they couldn't be moved with existing equipment. So project engineers came up with this. A behemoth robotic transport, piloted by a single operator with a remote control. Once at the site, giant cranes stretching 20 stories high carefully lifted each piece into place. On the other side of the island, workers erected the airport's air cargo terminal. A state-of-the-art facility, it was designed to handle the flood of containers that would pour through the airport every day. When finished, $9 billion of cargo each year would be routed to its proper destination, virtually untouched by human hands. In fact, the cargo terminal itself will be so thoroughly automated that the entire structure will be like a giant robot. By the spring of 1997, construction was at a fever pitch. The handover date, when China would govern Hong Kong, was only months away. The last two sections of the Western Harbour Tunnel were sunk and connected. In Kowloon, labourers were putting the final layer of paving on a new elevated highway. The high-speed rails that would carry the new airport express train were getting a fine-tuning. July the 1st, 1997, day of the handover. 156 years of British rule drew to a close. Chinese President Jiang Zemin accepted Hong Kong back into China. Behind the scenes, tireless negotiations have paid off. The Chinese agreed to 1 additional year to complete the airport. But construction teams knew that wasn't enough time. That's because the airport would utilize a vast array of new technologies, including new systems for air traffic control, flight information, customs screening, and security. The 1-year deadline left insufficient time to test these new systems. The biggest concern was the automated baggage handling system. It was designed to be the largest system of its kind. Nearly 20 kilometers of conveyor belts and luggage sorters, filling the entire basement level of the terminal. Capable of shuttling hundreds of thousands of bags a day to their proper destinations. The system also needed to provide continuous tracking and the most meticulous security screening available. Engineers didn't expect such a large and complex system to work perfectly without plenty of testing. But on July the 6th, 1998, time was up. 7 years of round-the-clock construction. A $20 billion price tag. And 10 million man-hours had come down to this, the moment of truth. Shut down the old airport, divert all air traffic and completely relocate staff and equipment to the new airport. In just 7 hours. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, Cathay Pacific Flight 889 was flying over Hawaii. It was scheduled to be the first plane to touch down at the new airport at 6:30 in the morning. At 1:17 a.m., the runway lights at Old Kai Tak Airport were switched off for the last time.
Goodbye, Kai Tak, and thank you.
Before dawn, on July the 7th, 1998, the massive land, sea and airlift was underway. It would take more than 800 trips to ferry equipment and personnel before the new Hong Kong International Airport was finally equipped and staffed. As the sun rose, new air traffic control made contact with its first customer.
Southern 307 for departure.
At 6:25 a.m., Flight 889 touched down on the north runway. Hong Kong International Airport was up and running. Only 7 years after construction began on one of the biggest infrastructure projects of the 20th century, Cathay Pacific Flight 889 touches down at the new Hong Kong International Airport.
it was great excitement, right? This was the very first aircraft that landed with passengers. Everybody is very happy, very celebratory mood.
But elation quickly turned to concern. The flight information system suddenly gave out, wreaking havoc in the passenger terminal. Monitors went blank. Aircraft gate assignments tangled, and thousands of passengers were delayed. At the air cargo terminal, things were even worse. The communication link with Kai Tak Airport was suddenly lost. Then, a critical database was accidentally deleted. The most technologically advanced airport in the world was forced to sort all cargo by hand. But they couldn't keep up. Before long, the tarmac was packed. The airport was forced to turn away 50,000 tons of freight. It was a discouraging opening day. But over the next few days, things began to improve. One by one, engineers found solutions to the technical glitches. Within weeks, passenger numbers began to climb, with more than 500 flights arriving or departing each day. Double the traffic handled by Kai Tak at its busiest. At the cargo terminal, the giant sorter was finally running smoothly. Just as planned, the vast maze of fully automated lifts and cranes was moving, sorting and stacking 4,000 tons of cargo a day. Within months of opening, the airport had become the new beating heart of the city, with Hong Kong's economic lifeblood coursing down its runways. But nature had one last surprise in store for the young airport. Only a year after the grand opening, Typhoon Sam slammed into Hong Kong. Winds gusted over 150 kilometers an hour. And right in the middle of the storm, China Air Flight 233, carrying 315 passengers, began its final approach. The plane had already tried to land once, only to abort and return to the sky. In a fateful decision, the pilots attempted a second landing. In the final seconds, the plane's right wing suddenly dipped, striking the runway. The plane flipped completely over and skidded down the tarmac. Emergency crews rushed to the burning plane. Still, 3 people were killed and over 200 were injured. It was the first serious accident for the Hong Kong International Airport. It led to stricter flight rules and improved weather radar. The new infrared system will most likely help to prevent similar accidents in the future. But what about the terminal structure itself? Can such a huge open structure really stand up to an even bigger disaster? The year is 2010. A Category 10 typhoon with wind speeds over 450 kilometers per hour bears down on Hong Kong. The storm's track has it making a direct hit on the airport. So emergency plans go into effect. Airport traffic control diverts planes to other airports, and outgoing flights are cancelled. But now there's an even greater concern. The glass terminal building is vulnerable. Engineers worry that the building could be ripped right off its foundations. The building trembles and groans. And then, the sound of shattering glass. It's a terrifying occurrence, but it actually relieves the pressure from the wind, possibly saving the building. The largest enclosed structure in the world survives with minimal damage. During construction, Hong Kong Airport was the largest infrastructure project in the world, overcoming tremendous logistical, technical and political obstacles. The lessons learned are invaluable as other cities and countries look to their futures. We can have no more inspiring an example of extreme engineering than Hong Kong International Airport.
$13,000 ships pass through it per year, moving 172 million tons of international commerce. But as supercargo ships increase in size, will the Panama Canal also have to expand? The Arch presents Extreme Engineering next Thursday at MI930.